Hello and welcome to Season 12, Episode 18 of the Ubuntu Podcast. In today's show, we're going to be having a chat about creating new apps, not distros, and how to get started with Linux desktop app development. We also have some GUI love, and we'll go over your feedback. Joining me this week, we have a triple M. It's me, Mark, Martin.
Hello.
And Matthias.
Hello.
So, Martin, what have you been up to recently?
I have been setting up the Steam client with Family View and library sharing in the NVIDIA cloud using the NVIDIA Shield as the front end to Steam.
Wow, okay. When you say in the NVIDIA cloud, what significance does that have to your library sharing setup?
So with the NVIDIA Shield, you can, run PC games. They run in the cloud on I think it used to be called the NVIDIA Grid. So basically, a load of Windows computers with NVIDIA graphics cards in them. And you can then say, I want to play this game. And it spins up that machine, that game runs, and it streams it to you, and you play the game, and it works remarkably well. I've always been how impressed it works, even with things like driving games where latency is kind of important for controls and stuff.
Oh, do you enjoy driving games?
I do like driving games. I've never mentioned this before.
Oh no, you should talk about that sometimes.
Anyway, my daughter said to me, it's the first time this has happened, she played Lego Worlds at her friend's house and she really wanted to play Lego Worlds. So I looked into this, and so I've created her a Steam account, and I bought Lego Worlds in my Steam account and shared my library with her. And we now have this Steam machine in the cloud, and it's got a quad-core Xeon processor and 16 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of NVMe storage and a 24 gig of video RAM NVIDIA Tesla GPU. So it's quite pokey. And we have this shared Steam instance, and I've been able to share that game with her, and she's now playing Lego Worlds for the PC on our little NVIDIA Shield, and the Steam client handles all of that Xbox controller support for the NVIDIA Shield controller. Now just looks like an Xbox controller in the cloud version of the game.
So hold on. So you have a dedicated gaming machine from NVIDIA, is that right? Or you have a machine which just happens to be connected to the internet and you're playing it over Steam streaming?
No, we have our own dedicated Windows computer in the NVIDIA cloud that happens to be a Steam computer, and both of our accounts are on it, and it's just like an actual PC that you would have at home.
But you don't have to have it at home.
Except it's not at home, and it's far more powerful than, most people's computers. And I suppose this is a glimpse to the future with things like, Google Stadia and Shadow Stream or another organization doing this.
Yeah.
Is it just Lego Worlds, or is there any Minecraft or Fortnite in your house?
So for Agatha, it's just Lego Worlds. However, on my account, it's many other things. So I've actually been trying it out for my own stuff. So I've been trying some racing games, of course, but also Fortnite. So yes, Fortnite is one of the options, and that actually doesn't use Steam, but it uses the Uplay launcher, but again, in a Windows instance in the cloud. So it just sparks this thing up, and I have Fortnite now, and a bunch of other games as well. So although you can go into the Steam client and you can look at your entire library and potentially install anything, and also it's interesting, you install a game that's 33 gigabytes and it just goes installing, done. So I don't know how they've done that, but installs are instantaneous, as are updates. But although you can enable any game from your library, there is only a prescribed list that are compatible. So if you try and install one that's not, it will tell you this isn't supported yet. But the games that are supported are presented through the sort of the marketplace UI on the NVIDIA Shield. And you search for Lego Worlds and you find it, and then underneath it will say Steam. So that's how you're actually accessing the game. Of course, you have to own a copy of these games, or you can purchase them if you don't own them. But it's working very well. I think it's terrific.
Yeah. Matthias, what have you been up to?
Right. So about a year ago, I created my first snap with a bit of help from Popey, and that went really well and was very easy. So I thought I'd take a stab at making another one and snap a piece of Windows software called HeidiSQL that I was using. I was mainly just running it through Wine at the time. And that hasn't been as straightforward.
Oh.
Yeah, when you start Frankensteining a setup from a lot of YAMLs, you end up in a lot of trouble.
So you were trying to piece together examples from other bits of software you found?
Yeah, and as a developer who doesn't know what they're doing, you got some interesting results.
Oh dear. So have you ended up with anything usable?
Not yet, but when I get some time, I'm going to poke Diddledane for some more help. He's been graciously pointing me in the wrong direction.
And for those of you not in the know, Diddledan is in our Telegram group. That's ubuntupodcast.org/Telegram. And his name is Daniel Llewellyn, and he's a prolific Snapcraft community contributor.
Yes, he snaps all the things.
And a boon to the community.
Yes, absolutely.
Other than that, I've been playing around with the latest Blender 2.80 release, which is a tremendous piece of software that I could talk about at length and already have.
So see last week's show for that.
Right, let's get on with the show. Now, we were listening to the latest telecast with Popey while Alan's been on his travels in Canada, and he had a short discussion with himself about the continuing proliferation of Linux distros and how he feels that it would be a much better service to the Linux ecosystem if people were to, build a distro for yourself to learn how Linux works. But if you want something to put out to the world, you shouldn't be making a distro, you should be making an app because of various reasons, which we will discuss now. So we've all listened. What did you think of Alan's comments?
So the first points that I broadly agreed. I obviously am kind of in an awkward spot here because I'm guilty of this very thing, which is making a distro, creating hype around it, making a website, creating social accounts, getting myself on DistroWatch, all of those, tick box, exercise of I'm a legit Linux distro. So yes, I'm guilty of that. But I do agree with Alan. We don't actually need any more distributions in the world. And I think that there's plenty of opportunity to learn how to create a distro and how to integrate a desktop environment in a distro without making a distro. You can use things like, Linux from scratch or Arch or Gentoo to learn the internals and how these things are stitched together. And if you're successful, I think Alan's right. You can keep it to yourself. What do you think about that?
I certainly like the thought of one day when I've got a few days of free time that I might do Linux from scratch to actually understand how all this stuff hooks together, because it does impress me that the knowledge that you've managed to gain by just saying, I could probably do with, making this for my family. And then now if I need to understand how something distro works, you seem to know it all. So, I've always been interested in that, but I would never have thought that anything that I might make from that point of view would be something that I would release as something that other people would rely on for their computing. That kind of scares me.
Yeah, it scares the hell out of me as well, if I'm completely honest.
Thinking back, I was one of the people who contributed to the Ubuntu phone when the, not Kickstarter, but the, what was it? Crowdfunding. Yeah, crowdfunding campaign for that, because I figured I would put my money where my mouth was. And one of the things I was most excited for that project was the core app suite, which I felt was deeply needed to have a integrated set of apps the way Apple had done with their iLife suite. And it's a shame to me that fell to the wayside.
Yeah, that core app story was quite powerful because it wasn't just the apps. They were also creating an SDK. It was a complete platform and ecosystem.
And it's something I still think we need. It's the separate technologies that we use, they're really great, but Apple really has nailed it with the ease of use that comes with just controlling the whole chain.
So do you think we've got anything in the Linux ecosystem that can compete in that respect with regards to, I want to make a Linux desktop app, this is the SDK that I go and use?
Well, we have frameworks, and it's largely split between the GNOME and the KDE philosophies of how we make software, unless you're going completely out in the woods on your own. But I think it would have to be a more thoroughly thought out collaboration at the core between all the platforms.
Yeah, there have been a few attempts to drive this from the Ubuntu community in the past. We had a few years ago, we had Quickly, which was a framework for spinning up a new project using Python and GTK, which was a nice idea, but I don't remember seeing any apps like that were sort of done and released and widely used, which was started using Quickly. I did try a few Hello World type things with it, and it was a nice tool, but it didn't seem to sort of take people much further than that. And then with the particularly with the Ubuntu phone project, we saw a lot of noise around QML, and I tried making some apps with QML, and I thought that it's a really brilliant way to make desktop apps and graphical apps in general. If as someone who's familiar mainly with the web, having a sort of declarative way of saying this is my interface, and then just hook into the code when you need it to actually do some logic, something like that as a framework to push people towards seems like a really good idea that we should have. I don't think we necessarily need to come up with a way of appeasing all of the current entrenched philosophies, because at the end of the day, what you need is something which distros will be willing to adopt. Distros will be willing to adopt it in what regard? We can build stuff that's of high enough quality to be that it'll be, if not available by default, but that they will put in the effort to integrate it into their environments.
I mean, I get dismayed that we can't even seem to agree on a notification system.
Yeah, so you're talking there about the underlying sort of functions that are fractured between the different desktop environments, right?
Yeah, it makes development harder than it should be.
Right. Well, there is, there are standards there about, on Dbus about, the notification services and what facilities you should expose. Whether or not all of the desktops are implementing all of those features, I can absolutely say they're not. There are differences and there are gaps in the implementations. But it was interesting, Mark, that you mentioned QML and also how, using web technologies would be comfortable to you. Did you not just describe Electron? Why is Electron not the way that we should be advocating people create their, applications for Linux? Because hey ho, you don't get to create an app for Linux, you get to create an app for Windows and Mac as well. Yeah, and I think Electron is a really good option, especially if that's what you want. I felt with QML, it from the sort of user experience, what's the word I'm after? Sort of design language point of view. That's not quite what I'm after, but I'll get there in a minute and I'll say it. The declarative style? No. I'm not talking about the writing code style. I'm talking about what you end up with for the user.
The visual language.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you end up with a familiar visual language with the sort of native feel to it that Qt gives you, which is the underlying technology. And you also have a lot of power to, if what QML offers you in the framework isn't enough, you can then go and create your own components for it, which can give you extra power to add into it. So that's why I think it's a really good technology. And I know that Electron, I've not built anything in Electron, so I don't know enough about how you do it. I'm aware that Electron does let you sort of create the interface in the web technologies and have more power, more native stuff behind it as well. But yeah, the stuff I'm more familiar with, Electron, is basically making a web page in a container, which is handy and something it's something I work with to an extent. But and you can also use the same technology then to make a phone application by wrapping it in Cordova instead of wrapping it in Electron, which is really handy. One of the things with web technologies, which I think Matthias might have been alluding to in the previous episode where he was talking about CSS, is that it's quite a broad and flexible set of technologies which can lead you to doing some things which aren't terribly advisable or terribly nice to use, and can add a lot of unnecessary bloat, whereas something like QML keeps you focused on a nice lean way of writing an application.
I also can't tell you just how much time I wasted just getting a button in the right place.
So do you think that we should be advocating for these web technology things, or do you think we should be taking a leaf out of Elementary's book, where they have spent a lot of time and been very careful about creating an SDK and a consistent way of creating applications, a consistent language, all of the documentation's available. They've got a code editor built right into the OS. They've got the whole App Store publishing pipeline nailed. Should all of the distros go off and recreate that kind of experience, or should we throw native applications out of the window and go with web apps?
I don't think each distro should go and create its own way of doing this. I think it would be really good if we could standardize, dare I say it, on some sort of common pathway for doing this sort of thing.
My sister tends to defend Sweden as not being generic. It's that we have standards, and it seems to work for us. And I don't see why the same wouldn't be true for a Linux ecosystem.
The difficulty is that we're starting from a position where we've got a dozen different solutions to this particular problem.
17 competing standards.
Right, indeed. So
what we need is a new standard which everyone will agree on.
Right. Okay. Well, there's some work going on in that space. There's always Google round the corner who are going to create something new and shiny for people to use.
Only to abandon it.
Well, maybe. Flutter seems to be gaining in popularity, and you can use that for creating mobile apps and desktop apps across all of the platforms, including Linux. So, again, that utilizes web technologies. Is this not telling us something?
As I'm building a web technology app, it's it's definitely an interesting field, but I don't think it's applicable to all types of software.
Okay, so you would prefer that you had native applications that fitted in with your desktop Linux operating system?
I'm probably biased because it's what I'm used to, and I don't know if I'd grown up 10 years from now, if I would feel differently. My default position is that we should have the software that seems cohesive and intuitive and familiar.
So we've danced around a little bit that we've got lots of different ways you could create apps for the Linux desktop. But the ultimate question that Alan was posing in his telecast is, what can we do to promote the idea that people create apps for Linux rather than distros? So, why is it that we don't have enough Tony Georges in the world who are focused on creating applications that garner high volumes of users?
I think the idea of making a distro is exciting. The idea of making a utility is not so much.
I think within the Linux ecosystem, distros are celebrated. We have DistroWatch, we don't have AppWatch. We do have some promoted apps in app stores and stuff, but we don't necessarily make as much of a fuss about apps and their developers as you see around. If you look at the mobile platforms, you don't get. Sure, you can create your own Android ROM if you want to, but you don't. That doesn't have the cachet around it that having your own app does.
True. Interesting. So it's the inverse there.
But obviously, Snap's alongside app images and Flatpaks, they're solving one aspect of this in terms of getting the software to everyone without having to worry about dependencies. So I think in a few years' time, once we hone in on a standard that will inevitably become more prevalent than the others, be it snaps, be it Flatpaks, it's all about making it easier for us to both make software but also consume it.
And, you raise a good point there. We do see a lot of ISVs and independent developers self-serving and publishing their applications in the Snap Store. And they would never have published or attempted to publish their applications in, the apt and RPM repositories, because that is the domain of, Linux enthusiasts and, volunteers and what have you. But the Snap Store embodies that app store paradigm that these developers are already familiar with. They're creating Electron applications. They're already publishing their applications in the Windows Store and the Mac OS Store. They have got the benefit of having something that runs on Linux too, and they want a store to publish their stuff in. And we see this, every day. There are new apps being published in the Snap Store, and quite often they're interesting applications that we would not have known about, that didn't even know that there were Linux versions available. And there's all sorts. There was one I saw today from the Brazilian government, and it's an Electron application. Yeah, you can think what you like about that, but it's an Electron application designed for deaf people, and it will listen to the audio that you're playing on YouTube videos or whatever, and then it displays an animated character that produces the sign language to translate,
Wow.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I know, right? And I would have never have known that this bit of software existed, or that the Brazilian government was sponsoring an initiative like this, had they not published it in the Snap Store. So I do think that, yes, this App Store mentality is kind of critical to this, and I would like to think that Alan and I are doing what we can at a professional level to promote this idea of creating apps, and we do celebrate people.
Well, your efforts are appreciated.
But I do understand that there is some kudos associated with being a distro creator or a distro maintainer, and I certainly capitalized on that, because ultimately ended up getting a job doing that very thing, working for Canonical. So that worked out very nicely for me. So, maybe there is some benefit in creating distros.
I mean, you have the benefit of having a buy-in from the community. You don't just have 10 users.
Right. Well, there was a time when I only had 10 users. There was a time when it was just me and my mum. It's quite different now. You measure your user adoption in, how many stadium can you fill with people.
Yeah, but did you set out to create a Mate for everyone, or was it did it begin as a learning opportunity for you?
It began as a way to facilitate my family's requirements to keep a Linux desktop environment running that they were familiar with. That was really where it came from.
Okay, so you solved a practical problem.
Yeah, but the other thing is that I have created several applications for Linux as a result of working on Ubuntu Mate, and I would have never have created these applications had I not created Ubuntu Mate. So one of my counters to Alan's argument is that I think, creating distros actually results in apps being created as well. Just look at the number of bespoke applications that exist within Ubuntu, like the Update Manager, for example, and the Software Center and various other things. Creating distros does also create apps, but I don't know whether a distro generates the same number of apps that the same developer could create if they were only making apps.
I mean, it does create a bit of a chaotic environment as well for an end user. I mean, I'm on 1804, and if I believe I search for update, I see 3 different icons for updating software. It's still a little bit of Wild West, and I would still argue that we need explicit standards of how we should do things.
Yeah, and there was a time when, Ubuntu was going there with Ubuntu Touch and Unity 8. It was its own thing. It had an SDK. It, looked and smelt like, the desktop environments from the mainstream vendors in that respect, in terms of, developer attractiveness.
Yeah, it's a shame that there's not money to be made in that space.
And maybe that's part of the thing. Maybe we need more monetization of apps on Linux, and that's what would drive more people to do it as a sort of a small time thing at first, but then, broaden it out.
I mean, I bought a fair few apps on my Android phone, but I don't know why there's such a resistance to paid software on the platform. I think we need both.
I think the discussion about paid apps on Linux is a debate for another day.
Let's leave that there for now then. So if you've got any thoughts about how we could drive people to build more apps on Linux, or what you think the best tools to use to build Linux apps are, then you can get in touch with us at all the usual ways. You can email show@ubuntupodcast.org and some other ways that we'll tell you about in a bit. And now it's time for some GUI love.
GUI love, you say?
Some GUI love.
What GUI love have you got for us, Mark?
Well, since I bought a new phone, I've had a OnePlus One sitting around unused, which is still just about limping along on its half-dead battery. So I thought that I would have a go at installing Ubuntu on it.
Oh, right.
Since it is one of the supported devices by the UBports project. And I went to their website and looked at their instructions, and I found out that they have a piece of software called the UBports installer, where basically you install this desktop app, you plug your phone in over USB, and then you select your phone and you press install Ubuntu, please, and it does everything, and then it reboots and you're running Ubuntu, which is fantastic. Way easier than I've seen any Android installer. You don't have to flash your own recovery or go into the recovery and flash your own ROM. Everything is handled for you. It pushes it over the USB and does all the reboots and the flashing the various images it needs to for you. And then you've got a running system, and it's really cool.
Excellent. Well done, UBports.
We love getting your feedback. If you've got a comment about something you hear on the show, why don't you drop us an email on show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And now it's time for all of your wonderful, lovely feedback. First up, Ali emailed us on show@ubuntupodcast.org.
I just wanted to reply to a last episode, this was season 12, episode 16, comment to say that the music used in the show are old, but they are nostalgic and fun. So please keep them. I love them.
And more music love came from Doc E. Brown 1 on Twitter.
I can't believe the hate for the theme music. I love it and have an absolute Pavlovian response when I hear it. It always makes me smile. Please never change it. Okay.
And Brian Hall emailed,
would it be feasible and of any value to be able to install and run Snap packages on the Windows OS?
Well, I certainly think it would be of value.
Yeah, and coming to a WSL install near you soon, I think is the answer to that one.
Yes. So, yeah, hopefully WSL2 will enable Snap packages to run on Ubuntu on Windows.
Yes, you can sort of coerce it to work today, but we're working on, refining that a little bit.
Okay, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works in practice.
I would be very curious to see if old Windows software that has been snapped with wine will run better.
Now, there's a challenge for somebody.
Or comparing the Blender Snap to the Blender Windows build. Shem Mac emailed,
I've played with Linux off and on over the years, but have never really had the need to set up a Linux box. I've recently set up Linux Mint in a virtual machine at work, but now it's up and running. I wondered if you could point me in some direction for some ideas or projects to do with a fresh Linux install to help my knowledge grow. I've set up a Samba server to test scanning from a photocopier. What are some must installs?
Now, this got me thinking about when I was first experimenting with Linux, what were the first things that I installed and played with? And I just got to thinking that really I just started using the things that I was using on Windows. I was doing a bit of web development, so I worked out how to use the tools to do that on Linux, and I'd been using the Firefox browser, so I worked out how to get Firefox installed and use that for web browsing. And then I just started to kind of explore what else was available, really. And I was using KDE, so I spent a lot of time just playing around and understanding what a Linux desktop environment was and how the file system was structured and things like that.
Yeah, well, my first experiences with Linux and what I used it for were very different. I was set up mail servers with Daemon Internet Mail Relay and FTP transfers and stuff like that. It was all very basic. I don't think about using Linux so much as just getting stuff done. So, I just install the applications that I need to get work done. And a lot of that is in the browser. But, as I look at my icons in my workspaces, obviously Visual Studio Code is very important to me. IRC Cloud for communicating with my colleagues and various projects I'm involved in, and the Telegram client, and Wavebox for organizing all of my, Google Mail stuff.
And obviously Blender now.
Well, I'll be honest with you, Blender is a mystery to me. It's a closed book. I don't think I have the mental capacity or maybe the creative flair to actually understand what Blender is for.
You don't need creativity, you need reference.
Right, okay. I don't think we're being very helpful. So I tell you what, it would be good if our listeners could give Shem some advice. What should Shem be looking at to, get them started with some interesting ideas and projects?
Next up, Charlie Auger, I really hope I pronounced that right, emailed.
I have been listening to the debate on whether you should advise people to run Linux and not Windows, and I have been amazed at the negativity. I've installed Linux Mint Cinnamon on many computers for friends and others, and the advantages are huge. It sounds like some of you are bottling out. Try it with one person and you will be amazed.
Yeah, I think for, many general purpose computer users will be able to get along and use Linux just fine. Most things work for most people most of the time these days.
Yeah, I think the reason I think I was hesitant when we had this discussion was that I don't have the time or inclination to be IT support for my friends, and I worry that if I get them to install Linux and things go wrong, then they're going to be asking me for help, and they might not live nearby, and then I'm going to feel bad about it. But actually, the few people I know who have switched since we had that conversation, I've not heard anything from them. So I feel like my fears are not entirely justified.
Yeah, and solving that IT support problem isn't as hard as you think. I mean, I've got some tips for you. What you do is you create a bulletproof, reliable distribution, and then you set up a pre-install hardware partnership with a computer vendor somewhere in the UK. And then when your family need a computer, you tell them to go to Entroware, buy this laptop, and it arrives at their house the next day with your operating system pre-installed, which starts an application you deliberately wrote for your family. So when they say, well, how do I install Google Chrome? They just have to click one button and it's all taken care of. And at no point do they have to, talk to you or phone you up. You just have to tell them where Entroware lives on the internet. It's brilliant. It only takes 5 years to achieve this level of Zen mastery of tech support. But, once you get there, it's plain sailing.
And as the software needs grow, you just need to keep making more software, thus fulfilling Pope's prophecy.
And finally, Stefan from gpodder.net tweeted,
"Thanks for mentioning my search for a new maintainer on your podcast. Very much appreciated. For anyone interested, go to this GitHub URL, which we'll have in the show notes."
Yes, I thought that was worth mentioning again, just in case there's anyone listening who might be interested in taking on maintenance of gpodder.net. And that's all your feedback.
Do you tweet? Follow at Ubuntu Podcast and like or retweet our tweets so all your Twitter buddies can find us.
And that's all for episode 18. Thank you all for listening. We will be back next week where we'll be discussing community news, goings on and events. I'm not sure who we're going to have with us next week, but it'll be a surprise. I know I'll be here.
I might not be.
You might not be. Alan might be.
I'm not sure yet.
Maybe we'll have a guest. Maybe not.
Maybe it could be 3 random people that have never done the podcast before. It's
That would be a fun experiment, wouldn't it? Yes.
Distributed podcasting.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just get a load of people to do audio clips on Telegram and stitch them together.
A telecasted podcast.
Yes. Well, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email show@ubuntupodcast.org. You can come and chat with all 3 of us and a cast of hundreds at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram. You can tweet at Ubuntu Podcast on Twitter, and you can leave nasty comments on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Ubuntu Podcast.